They planned everything. They chose their location. They chose their moment. They waited for the right window of the quiet street, the isolated parking lot, the dark corner where no one seemed to be looking. They believed they had calculated every risk. They believed they were invisible. But they forgot about the one witness that never sleeps, never blinks, never looks away, and never forgets a single detail. The camera. A lens doesn't get nervous. It doesn't hesitate. It doesn't decide whether what it's seeing is important enough to remember. It simply watches. Silently, patiently, and it records everything: the face, the clothing, the license plate, the timestamp, the exact angle of every step. All of it, perfectly preserved. And when the predator disappears into the night, believing they've left nothing behind the camera, still as every single thing they thought was gone. Tonight on Behind the Crime, we are covering 3 of the most chilling, most documented, and most consequential kidnapping cases ever captured on surveillance footage. 3 cases. 3 victims whose stories rocked their cities and their country. 3 perpetrators who made the same catastrophic miscalculation. They didn't think anyone was watching. 2 of these cases end with a rescue. 1 of them does not. And all 3 of them end with a truth that needed to be told. Before we begin, I want to say something plainly. Every person we discussed tonight was real. Every family that waited by the phone was real. Every moment of terror was real. We are not here to sensationalize, we are here to bear witness. Because these stories deserve to be remembered fully and honestly. And because understanding exactly how these crimes unfolded is the only way we become better at recognizing the warning signs before the next time. With that said, let's begin. Scene shift: Anchorage, Alaska, February 1st, 2012. The city of Anchorage. Alaska sits at the edge of the world in a way that few American cities do. Surrounded by mountains, bordered by wilderness, cut through by long Alaskan winters where darkness falls early and the cold keeps most people indoors. It is a city where people trust each other in the specific way that people in smaller, more isolated communities tend to trust each other. Where a familiar face behind a coffee counter feels like a small assurance that the world is still safe and ordinary. Samantha Koenig was 18 years old. She worked the evening shift at a drive-through coffee kiosk called Common Ground Espresso, a small stand on Tudor Road that stayed open later than most other coffee shops in the area. She was the kind of person people describe as bright and full of life, someone with plans, with energy, with a future she was actively building. Her friends knew her as warm. Her customers knew her as the smiling face at the window who handed them a drink and sent them on their way. On the evening of February 1st, 2012, Samantha was working the closing shift. It was just her, alone in that small kiosk, going through the routine of the end of the shift the way she had done countless times before. And then a man walked up to the window and ordered an Americano. Surveillance footage from inside the kiosk that night captured the moment clearly. You can see Samantha making the drink, going through the motions of her job, and then something shifts. Former FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon, who later reviewed the footage, described exactly what you can see in that video. You see her body language change. She goes from someone who's just serving someone coffee to being very nervous and very concerned. The man had pulled out a gun. He demanded money. Samantha put her hands in the air and backed away from the window. The man climbed into the kiosk, and police said he used zip ties to bind her hands behind her back before leading her out. The light switch was right next to the panic button. Samantha never pressed it. Police later said she was probably too afraid to focus on the gun in her face to reach for anything that might make things worse. She walked out of that kiosk with her hands tied behind her back. Into the night, into a truck parked across the street, and she was gone. Anchorage didn't know it yet, but it had just come face to face with one of the most methodical and dangerous criminals in American history. A man who had been operating across the country for over a decade without triggering a single alert on any law enforcement database. A man who had killed before multiple times, in multiple states, and had never left enough behind for anyone to find him. His name was Israel Keyes. Scene shift: who was Israel Keyes? Israel Keyes was 34 years old at the time of Samantha's kidnapping. He lived in Anchorage with his 10-year-old daughter and his girlfriend. From the outside, he looked like exactly what he presented himself as: a contractor, a small business owner, a quiet neighbor, a father. Nobody who knew him in Anchorage would have believed what was underneath. Keyes claims to have committed his first violent crime in 1998, around the time he enlisted in the U.S. Army. By the time he drove to that coffee stand on Tudor Road, investigators believe he had already killed as many as 10 people across multiple states, Washington, New York, Vermont, and Florida among them. And his methods were extraordinary in their coldness. FBI Special Agent Jolene Godin, who spent months interviewing Keyes after his arrest, described him to investigators in stark terms. Although he chose many of his victims randomly, a tremendous amount of planning went into these crimes. Keyes enjoyed what he did, and he had no remorse at all. He told us if he hadn't been caught, he would have continued kidnapping and murdering people. He had developed a system specifically designed to avoid detection. He would bury what investigators called murder kits, containers holding weapons, zip ties, and other materials in remote locations across the country, sometimes years before he ever planned to use them. He would then fly to a distant location, rent a car, retrieve the buried kit, and commit a crime, then fly home, making it nearly impossible to connect him to any particular act through ordinary investigative methods. He had studied serial killers the way other people study hobbies. He knew what had gotten others caught. He designed his crimes specifically around avoiding those mistakes. And on February 1st, 2012, he broke one of his own rules. He had never before killed close to home. He had always traveled. He had always created distance. But this time, he chose a target just miles from his own house, in the city where his daughter and girlfriend were asleep in the next room. That choice, that single deviation from his own method, is what ultimately destroyed him. I seen Shift, the ransom plan that became a trail. After driving away from the Common Grounds kiosk with Samantha in the cab of his truck, Keyes told her something designed to keep her calm. He explained to her that this was a kidnapping for ransom. He told her that if her family paid, she would be returned safely. He even asked her to help him, explaining that they would raise money by seeking the public's help. He convinced Samantha that cooperation meant survival. She believed him. She tried to talk to him. She tried to build a connection that might make him see her as a person rather than a means to an end. She gave him her ATM card and PIN number. She told him where her house was. She told him that the car parked in the driveway was shared with her boyfriend, and that his ATM card was inside it. Keyes drove to Samantha's home to retrieve the second ATM card. While he was there, her boyfriend confronted him, yelling at this stranger in the driveway and then running back inside to get help. Keyes fled before he could be stopped. He went back to his own property. He put Samantha in a shed in front of his house, turning the radio up so that no one inside the house would hear as she called out. And then, in a decision that reveals exactly how calculated he was, Keyes took a pre-planned cruise vacation. He had booked the trip months earlier, a 2-week cruise departing from New Orleans. His girlfriend and daughter were going with him. The morning after he kidnapped Samantha Koenig, he packed his bags, drove to the airport, and flew to Louisiana. He left her in that shed. He went on a family vacation. And when he came back to Anchorage on February 17th, more than 2 weeks after the kidnapping, Samantha Koenig was gone. The FBI later released a full account of what happened in the period after Keyes returned. It is deeply disturbing, and we are not going to dwell on every detail. But what matters for this story, what matters for understanding how the cameras and the ATM trail ultimately brought this man down, is what Keyes did next. He staged a photograph. He used it to create a ransom note demanding $30,000. He typed the note on a manual typewriter he had purchased specifically for the purpose. He placed the note in a local dog park, hidden under a memorial flyer for a dog named Albert. Then, using Samantha's cell phone, he texted her boyfriend directions to find it. The note was recovered by Anchorage Police Department, and Samantha's father, along with donations from a generous public, put $30,000 into the ATM account connected to his daughter's debit card. They were going to try to catch whoever came for the money. And then, slowly, steadily, the cameras started watching. Scene shift. The ATM trail across America. On March 6, 2012, Keyes boarded an Alaska Airlines flight from Anchorage to Las Vegas, Nevada. From there, he began driving across the American Southwest, and he began using Samantha Koenig's debit card at ATMs along the way. Each withdrawal was on camera. Each timestamp placed him in a specific location at a specific time. Each transaction was a point on a map that investigators were drawing in real time. March 7th, Wilcox, Arizona. March 8th, Lordsburg, New Mexico. March 8th again, Shepherd, Texas. March 10th, Humble, Texas. He was moving south and east, and every ATM he touched, every camera he walked past, every frame of surveillance footage he appeared in was being collected by investigators who now had a clear image of the man they were looking for. A lookout bulletin was circulated for the suspect's car, a blue rental vehicle that had appeared on cameras. Law enforcement began monitoring hotel parking lots for out-of-state rental cars that matched the description. On the morning of March 13th, 2012, Texas Highway Patrol Corporal Brian Henry and Texas Ranger Stephen Rayburn were doing exactly that when they spotted a vehicle matching the bulletin in Lufkin, Texas. They pulled it over. When officers searched the vehicle, they found cash stained with bright ink from a bank die pack, indicating a recent bank robbery. In the car, they also found Samantha Koenig's ATM card, her cell phone, and a gun. There was also a disguise in the vehicle that matched the man seen in the ATM photos. Israel Keyes was in that car. He was extradited to Alaska. He was charged with Samantha Koenig's murder. And over the following months, in conversations with FBI agents, he began telling investigators about the full scope of what he had done across more than a decade. He spoke with investigators freely at first, describing murders in multiple states, confessing to crimes that had gone unsolved for years. FBI Special Agent Godin said he was a man who appeared completely ordinary in person. You could be in a room with him, and it was like you were in the room with your neighbor. But eventually, as his identity became public and the media coverage escalated, he stopped cooperating. He wanted his daughter protected from the publicity. He asked to be executed quickly. On December 2nd, 2012, Israel Keyes was found dead in his jail cell in Anchorage. He had concealed a razor blade and taken his own life. On the wall of his cell, he left a final message, 11 skulls drawn in his own blood, labeled, "We are one." Investigators believe this number represented his victims. He took most of his secrets with him, but he could not take back the camera footage. He could not undo the ATM trail he left across Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. He could not UN ring the bell that began with a single surveillance video inside a small coffee kiosk on Tudor Road in Anchorage, Alaska. The FBI has continued working to identify additional victims based on the clues Keyes left behind. The movements he described, the buried caches investigators have recovered, the geographic patterns of his travel. The investigation into who else he may have harmed is, as of the Bureau's most recent statements, still ongoing. Samantha Koenig was 18 years old. She made coffee for strangers at a kiosk on Tudor Road, and she had plans for her future. She did not survive, but the camera that watched from inside that stand, the one that captured the exact moment her body language changed, the moment she went from making someone's order to understanding that something terrible was happening, that camera led investigators to the man responsible. And Israel Keyes, one of the most careful and systematic criminals in modern American history, was caught. Not because he made an obvious mistake, but because he couldn't outrun a lens. Scene shift. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, November 2nd, 2014, 9:40 p.m. Now let's cross the country to a very different kind of night. Philadelphia, a Sunday evening in early November. The kind of night where the air is cool and the streets in residential neighborhoods are mostly quiet. Where people are wrapping up their weekends and getting ready for the week ahead. Carlesha Freeland-Gaither was 22 years old. She was a nursing assistant, someone who had chosen a career built around helping people in their most vulnerable moments. That Sunday evening, she had visited her godson at a family gathering just a few blocks from her home in Germantown. Now she was walking those few blocks back. She had made this walk before. She knew her neighborhood. She was almost home. On the surveillance footage from a camera at the intersection of Coulter and Green Streets, footage that would be seen by millions of people within the next 24 hours, the story unfolds in real time. A gray Ford Taurus pulls slowly along the street and parks. A man gets out. He moves quickly toward Carlesha from behind. And then, without any warning, he grabs her. She does not go quietly. Not even close. She struggled immediately and fought with everything she had. Barnes allegedly hit her on the head with a hammer and threatened to kill her if she didn't stop. But even after being forced into the vehicle, She continued to battle, smashing the car's rear window with a hammer she found in the back seat, even striking her attacker in the head with it before he was able to subdue her. A man named Dwayne Fletcher was walking on a nearby street and heard Carlesha screaming. He ran toward the sound and arrived just in time to see Barnes forcing her into the car. Fletcher yelled at Barnes and tried to stop him, but Barnes had a 12-inch knife. Fletcher backed off, and then he did the single most important thing anyone could have done in that moment. He called 911. Twice. Lead investigator Detective James Sloan later said at a press conference. He witnessed it. He watched. He called the police twice. If it wasn't for him, I don't think would have the same outcome. This man is a hero. The car was gone, but the camera had everything. And Carlesha Freeland-Gaither, even as she was being driven away at speed into the dark, was already thinking. Scene shift. The breadcrumb trail begins. What Carlesha did in the hours after that abduction is one of the most remarkable examples of survival instinct ever documented in a kidnapping case. She deliberately dropped her phone on the street during the struggle. She dropped her glasses. She was planting evidence, leaving physical markers of the scene that said, "Something happened here. Someone was taken. Start looking." And once she was inside that car, bound, terrified, knowing that every mile between her and Philadelphia made her harder to find, her mind was still working. As Barnes drove south into Maryland, Carlesha gave him her ATM card and PIN number. She hoped the transaction would catch the attention of investigators. And it did. Barnes used her card at an ATM in Aberdeen, Maryland, roughly 75 miles from Philadelphia, early the following morning. He was then captured on the surveillance camera of a nearby gas station convenience store. Clear footage, clear face, a new location pinpointed on the growing map of his movements. As Barnes continued driving, he periodically threw garbage from the car. One of those discarded bags ended up in the driveway of a woman in Havre de Grace, Maryland. Inside it was a receipt from a Philadelphia supermarket, a bag of potato chips, and broken glass. The woman recognized it might be connected to the kidnapping that had been all over the news. She called police. Investigators used the time and date on the receipt to pull surveillance footage from the supermarket, and there was Barnes on camera, buying those same chips. Thread by thread, camera by camera, the net was tightening, and then came the detail that sealed it. Police in Virginia recognized Barnes from the ATM surveillance footage released to the public. They had been looking for him in connection with a violent attack in that state. They connected the vehicle to a dealership in Virginia. They called the dealership, and because Barnes had poor credit, that dealership had installed a GPS tracking device in the car as part of the financing agreement. They activated it. There was a live signal on that car, in real time, moving. The FBI, the U.S. Marshals, the ATF, and Philadelphia police converged on the location the GPS was painting. A shopping center parking lot just off I-95 in Jessup, Maryland. FBI agent Timothy Jones described the moment of the arrest. Agents got a clear view of a man and a woman sitting inside the car. Barnes moved toward the driver's seat, and for fear of him driving away before they could confirm Carlesha's identity, the agents moved in immediately. Barnes stepped out and was arrested on the spot. Carlesha Freeland-Gaither, who had fought from the very first second, who had thought clearly under conditions that would have paralyzed most people, who had left a trail of breadcrumbs across 2 states for investigators to follow, was alive. She had been missing for 72 hours. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey said at the press conference after her rescue, "It's very special for all of us. You hope, but you don't really know until you're actually able to get her and make sure she's okay. So it's very important that this is a happy ending." Her mother, Keisha Gaither, stood at a microphone surrounded by family members and said something that stopped everyone in that room. "Thank you so much for having us in your prayers. Thank you for keeping me up. Thank you for being there for us." She was taking her baby home. Scene shift. Who was Delvin Barnes? Delvin Barnes was 37 years old when he drove down that Philadelphia street on a Sunday night. He had told investigators after his arrest that he had abducted Carlesha randomly, that he had hoped to steal money from her so he could travel to Virginia to visit his daughter. But Barnes was not a man who had simply made a terrible decision on a Sunday night. His history told a very different story. In 2005, he had been convicted of aggravated assault, criminal trespass, false imprisonment, and other charges in a case involving his estranged wife. He served time and was released. And then, just 1 month before he grabbed Carlesha at Philadelphia Street, he had committed another violent abduction. A 16-year-old girl in Charles City County, Virginia. He had attacked her and taken her against her will. She had survived only by escaping while he was occupied elsewhere, walking 2 miles, badly injured, until she found help. DNA tests had come back matching Barnes to that attack just days before he appeared in Germantown. A warrant had already been issued for his arrest. He was already wanted, already a convicted violent offender, already the subject of an active investigation. And the Virginia ATF office, the same office that would ultimately help bring him down, recognized him from the Philadelphia ATM footage before anyone else did. In 2016, Delvin Barnes pleaded guilty to federal kidnapping charges. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. He is currently serving that sentence at a facility in California. Carlesha Freeland-Gaither came home. She recovered. She built a life. She had a son. She eventually spoke publicly about her experience, about the fear, the survival decisions, and even about forgiveness. In February 2024, a Lifetime movie about her story premiered, 10 years after the night on that Philadelphia street. And Dwayne Fletcher, the man who heard a scream and ran toward it and called 911 twice, was honored by the City of Philadelphia City Council for his actions. He heard a stranger in danger, and he did not look away. That decision mattered. That decision is part of why Carlesha came home. Scene shift, Birmingham, Alabama, October 12, 2019, 7:25 p.m. Now I need to ask you to prepare yourself before we go into this next case, because this one involves a child. And unlike the previous 2 cases, this one does not have the same kind of ending. Her name was Samantha Koenig. She was 3 years old. Her family called her Cupcake, and the moment you see any photograph of her, you understand why. She was all brightness, all joy, the kind of child who fills whatever space she inhabits with something that makes the world feel better just by being in it. On the evening of October 12, 2019, Camille was at a birthday party at the Tom Brown Village public housing community in Birmingham, Alabama. She was doing what 3-year-olds do at parties, playing outside, close to the building, near other children, in the way that kids do when they feel safe. She was supposed to be safe, but someone had been watching. Earlier that same day, hours before Camille disappeared, surveillance footage from a Shell gas station near the housing complex captured a man inside the store purchasing candy. Nearly $19 worth of candy. Later that day, security cameras at a nearby school caught a blue Toyota Sequoia moving slowly through the parking lot. 2 preteen girls who had just finished cheerleading practice told investigators that a man in the SUV stopped them and offered them candy. One of the girls said the man told her directly, "I'm looking for a girl that looks like you." The girls walked away quickly. They were alert. They trusted their instincts. But Camille was 3 years old. She didn't have the same defenses. Surveillance footage from outside the building where the birthday party was held showed Camille playing near the entrance with another toddler when a man approached. The footage was instrumental in identifying Patrick Stallworth as a suspect. And by 7:25 p.m., Camille Koenig was gone from that party. Gone so quickly that no one saw her leave. Gone so completely that by the time anyone realized she wasn't there anymore, the Sequoia was already moving. Our scene shift. The search that broke Birmingham. Within minutes of Camille's disappearance being reported, her family was searching. Within hours, police were involved. By the following day, the FBI was on the case and Birmingham had launched one of the most intensive community searches the city had ever seen. City Hall lit up in purple, Camille's favorite color. Purple ribbons appeared on doors and windows across the city. Hundreds of people turned out for search parties. The story spread nationally. A 10-year-old boy who had been at the birthday party told investigators he saw a man and woman in an SUV handing out candy, and that at some point he saw Camille inside that SUV, crying. The blue Toyota Sequoia was identified, and then, with a combination of witness accounts and surveillance footage, investigators zeroed in on 2 people, 39-year-old Patrick Stallworth and his girlfriend, 29-year-old Derek Brown. Stallworth was arrested on separate charges just 2 days after Camille disappeared. He was later linked to her disappearance through the growing body of evidence. When detectives executed a search warrant on the apartment shared by Stallworth and Brown, they found a blood-stained plastic mattress cover. DNA testing linked that stain to 3 people: Patrick Stallworth, Derek Brown, and Camille Kinney. She had been there, in their home. And then, 10 days after the birthday party, a farm worker near a landfill outside Birmingham found her. Camille Kinney, 3 years old, the child of family called Cupcake, had been gone from this world for days before anyone found her. The medical examiner determined that her cause of death was asphyxiation. Testing also found that she had been given dangerous substances, drugs administered by adults, to a 3-year-old child. I'm not going to rush past that. She was 3, and what was done to her deserves to be named plainly, even if it is the hardest sentence in this entire episode. Scene shift: the long road to justice. The evidence that cameras and investigative work had assembled was overwhelming. The gas station footage, the school parking lot footage, the birthday party footage that identified Stallworth, the mattress cover, the DNA, the testimony of a 10-year-old child who had seen Cupcake crying in the back of that Sequoia. And then there was what came out during the federal trial. The prosecution played recordings from Stallworth's own police interviews. And while he was awaiting trial in jail, a message was sent from his account on the jail tablet system to a family member that said, "I'm sorry I did this. It was an accident." That poor baby's family. 11 words, typed by a man who had taken everything from a little girl who only had 3 years to live. Both Stallworth and Brown were tried and convicted of federal kidnapping charges resulting in death, one of the most serious charges federal law allows. On March 3rd, 2023, more than 3 years after Camille disappeared from that birthday party, both Patrick Stallworth and Derek Brown were sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge presiding over the sentencing said something that captured what everyone in that courtroom was feeling. "It's the most I could do. If I had the ability to do more, I would." Life in prison. No parole. No release date. For both of them. And still, it is not enough. Because Cupcake was 3 years old. She never got to be 4. She never got to grow into the person she was becoming. She never got to choose who she would be. What she got was 10 days of people in purple ribbons searching for her and loving her before the worst news came. And she got a family who fought, through 3 years of court proceedings, through every detail that had to be relived in testimony, through every day of waiting for a verdict, to make sure the people responsible would never have the freedom to do this to anyone else. Scene shift. What these 3 cases tell us together. 3 cases. 3 different cities. 3 different perpetrators. 3 very different outcomes. And yet every single one of them runs through the same thread. The camera. Israel Keys, one of the most meticulous, most careful, most studied criminals in American history, was caught because surveillance camera inside a coffee kiosk recorded his face at the moment he made the choice to stop hiding. Every ATM camera he walked past across 4 states added another point on the map investigators were drawing in real time. He had buried murder kits in remote forests across the country to avoid detection. He had flown to distant cities and rented cars to create distance between himself and his crimes. And he was undone by footage from a tiny drive-through coffee stand. Delvin Barnes, a man with a violent history who grabbed a woman off the street in broad darkness on a Sunday night, left his face on a street corner camera, on an ATM camera, on a gas station camera, in footage that Virginia investigators recognized immediately because they were already looking for him. A GPS device installed by a car dealer because of a credit score sealed the rest. Patrick Stallworth circled a school parking lot on a camera. He appeared on a gas station camera buying candy hours before the abduction. He appeared on surveillance footage from the building where Camille was taken. Every step of the plan he thought was invisible was actually documented. None of them realized they were being watched. All of them were. Scene shift. What the camera can and cannot do. But here is the honest truth that these cases also carry. Cameras document. They do not prevent. The camera at the Common Grounds kiosk recorded every second of what happened to Samantha Koenig. It did not stop Israel Keys from walking up to that window with a gun. The camera at Coulter and Green Streets in Germantown recorded every second of what happened to Carlesha Freeland-Gaither. It did not stop Delvin Barnes from putting her in that trunk. The cameras at the Tom Brown Village housing complex recorded the moment Camille Kinney was approached and taken. They did not stop a predator who had spent the entire day preparing to find a child. The footage gave investigators their starting points. The footage told a story that witnesses alone could not fully tell. The footage, combined with ATM records and GPS devices and the tips from members of the public who paid attention and called when something felt wrong, is what drove these investigations to resolution. But resolution is not the same as rescue. And rescue is not the same as prevention, which is why the human element in these stories matters just as much as the technology. Dwayne Fletcher, who heard Carlesha screaming and ran toward the sound instead of away from it, and called 911 twice. Without him, without that first call that established a timeline and a vehicle description before the ATM footage was even developed, the investigation might have taken a very different shape. Investigators said directly that his actions likely saved her life. The woman in Havre de Grace, Maryland, who found a trash bag in her driveway and recognized the receipt inside it from the news coverage she had been watching. She connected a piece of garbage to a missing person and made a phone call. That supermarket receipt put Barnes on a camera and confirmed the direction he was traveling. The Virginia ATF office, which recognized a face in a Philadelphia crime photo because they were already hunting the same man for a crime in a different state. The 10-year-old boy at Camille's birthday party who told investigators exactly what he had seen, a man, a woman, an SUV with candy, and a little girl crying in the back. Cameras capture the truth. People activate it. And together, the lens that never blinks and the human being who pays attention and speaks up, they build the cases that change everything. Scene shift. Living with the outcomes. Carlesha Freeland-Gaither is here. She survived. She went home to her mother and her family on a November night in 2014, and the relief of that reunion, her mother standing at that microphone saying, "Thank you for keeping me up, thank you for being there for us," is a moment that still moves anyone who watches it. She built a life. She became a mother herself. She has spoken publicly about her experience with a grace that is extraordinary given what she survived. She chose to talk about forgiveness. She chose to acknowledge the humanity of moving forward even after something that most people could not imagine surviving. Her father said after her recovery that she had survived by befriending her captor, using conversation and connection as tools for survival during the 3 days she was held. That is not a small thing. That is a level of presence of mind under terror that very few people could sustain. Samantha Koenig did not come home. Her family received the news in the spring of 2012 that her remains had been recovered from Matanuska Lake, that the FBI's dive team had found her. Her father had stood up for her. Her community had donated money. They had done everything right. And still, and Camille McKinney's family, who tied purple ribbons across Birmingham, who searched for 10 days, who sat through a federal trial and waited for a verdict and heard a judge say he would have done more if he could, they buried their little girl in her favorite color. And they carry her absence every single day. There is no way to look at these 3 cases together and feel anything other than the full weight of both what cameras and investigators can do and what they sometimes cannot do in time. Justice was delivered in all 3 cases. 3 perpetrators are where they belong. The truth was told. The record exists. But the measure of justice is not the sentence. It is the gap between what should have been and what was. It is the 18-year-old who should have been handing someone coffee and then going home. It is the 22-year-old who should have made it the last few blocks to her front door. It is the 3-year-old who should have had a whole life in front of her. That gap, that's where the real weight lives. Scene shift, final reflection. We have covered the world in cameras because somewhere deep in our collective instinct, we understand that truth needs witnesses. We understand that things done in the open, to real people, in real places, those things deserve to be seen, documented, preserved, not allowed to simply disappear into silence and darkness the way predators hope they will. And the 3 men at the center of tonight's cases, Israel Keys, Delvin Barnes, Patrick Stallworth, all believe, in the way that predators believe these things, that they had chosen their moments carefully enough, that the darkness was dark enough, that no one was watching. They were all wrong. The cameras were there, and the cameras remembered everything they did. Before you leave, I need your comments on this one. All 3 of these cases were changed by surveillance footage. In Carlesha Freeland-Gaither's case, the cameras helped rescue her while she was still alive. In Samantha Koenig's case, the ATM footage led investigators to one of the most prolific and carefully organized criminals in modern American history, someone who had evaded detection for over a decade. And in Camille Kinney's case, footage from outside a housing complex helped put 2 people behind bars for the rest of their lives. Here is a question I want you to think about and answer in the comments. Which of these 3 cases affected you the most, and why? Was it Israel Keys and the sheer scale of what was hiding in plain sight? Was it Carlesha and the extraordinary presence of mind she showed during 72 hours of terror? Or was it Cupcake, 3 years old, purple ribbons across an entire city, and a verdict that came 3 years too late? Tell me, because this community has conversations about these things that matter. And here's the bigger question. Knowing that cameras document but don't prevent, what do you think actually keeps people safer? Is it more cameras, better response systems, communities that pay attention, or something else entirely? Drop your answer below. If this episode stayed with you, and I think it will, share it. Because Samantha Koenig deserved to close up a coffee stand and go home. Because Carlesha Freeland-Gaither deserved to walk those last few blocks in peace. Because Camille McKinney deserved to grow up. They all deserve better. The least we can do is make sure they are never forgotten. This has been Behind the Crime. Subscribe if you haven't already. And we will see you in the next one.